So I'm back out on my e-bike today, folks. I'm in District 1, Ho Chi Minh City, behind the number 69 bus. Just going to work my way through the traffic here, and I'm going to tell you about what kind of jobs expats do in Vietnam. So sometimes people ask me, what do I do? You've been living here for 6-7 years. What do you do in Vietnam? What can I do in Vietnam? I want to come to Vietnam. What kind of job can I do? So I thought I'd do a video today just talking about typical or the most common jobs that expats or foreigners may do in Vietnam. How you could get them, what kind of salary you might get, benefits, things like that. So job number one is teaching. So maybe you would become an English teacher, you could become an English teacher, or you could become a subject teacher at an international school. These positions are quite different. It's relatively easy to get an English teaching position here, especially if you're a native speaker. What kind of salary could you expect? Well, anywhere from about $17 up to $35 an hour. The higher paid positions are for teaching things like IELTS, subject teaching like, scientific English, perhaps test prep. So what can you earn a month? So perhaps 80 hours a month, you'll be earning anywhere between $1,500 and $3,000 if you're very lucky. The problem with the English teaching jobs here is you don't get many benefits. So not many of the schools provide you with work permits and then the TRC that goes along with it, which I think is pretty naff. You don't get many paid holidays as a teacher here, an English teacher, and general things like sick days, health insurance, not very common. As a qualified subject teacher, for example, at an international school like somewhere like BIS or AIS, you could expect to earn between $3,000 and $5,000 US a month. You'll probably get 2 to 3 months holiday a year fully paid, and you'll get return flights home at least once a year, maybe even for your family as well. They will pay your accommodation as well. I know someone who works at BIS gets about $700 a month for their accommodation on top of their salary, so not bad, right? 2-year contract as well. Especially if you're being hired from outside the country. Internal hires, I think they try to get away with a little bit less because you're already here. So teaching aside, what else do expats do in Vietnam? Well, at the other end of the spectrum, you get quite a lot of professionals who are brought in by their company on 6-month, 1 year, 2-year even contracts. So directors, managers, engineers. For example, you have a lot of Koreans and Japanese here working on the metro who are paid very well, coming over on short-term lucrative contracts. You have NGOs, managers and directors of NGOs who also are paid quite well and will also get good benefits alongside their base pay. Vietnam has a lot of manufacturing industries. A lot of garments are made here, a lot of bags. A lot of American companies like Osprey, who make very high quality backpacks, are based here, and they will bring in graphic designers. I think Burton Snowboards are also here. They'll bring in people from anywhere really, and pay them very, very well. So the expat package is normally pretty good and comparable to other countries like Singapore, for example, and you would expect to get everything covered: healthcare, schools for your kids, accommodation, etc., etc. So you really won't be spending a lot of your own money, really. So yeah. Whether you'd want to choose Vietnam over somewhere like Singapore, Hong Kong, or Malaysia is another question. Don't get people driving like that in Singapore, that's for sure. But that's entirely up to you. If you're of the more adventurous type of mindset, then yeah, go for Vietnam. If not, then the comfort of somewhere like Singapore may be a better option for you. The issue, or one of the big issues with working in Vietnam, is the very high rate of tax. So Vietnam considers you a resident if you're here for more than 6 months of the year, which obviously you would be if you're working here. And the tax rate here is tiered like it is in most countries, but the highest rate, 35%, kicks in at a very low amount. So what you will find is the vast majority of foreigners and expats here get their tax covered by their company, and they deal in net. They negotiate in net salary amount, and I'd recommend that to you as well, folks. If you are, especially if you're going to be offered a good salary, make sure that the prospective company deals in net amounts, because you're going to have a nasty surprise when your first paycheck arrives otherwise. What are the types of jobs that expats do in Vietnam? Well, import-export businesses. So starting your own business here is not too difficult, although you need quite a lot of capital investment. And I believe it's over 6 figures to get the investor's license and then the corresponding permits and resident permits. You need to invest quite a lot into a business. But it could be very lucrative. You know, labor in Vietnam is very cheap, especially for things like garment making and, you know, apparel, things like that. So yeah, definitely huge potential if you've got the skills and the knowledge to start a business here. And a lot of foreigners do that and become quite successful. Another thing that's quite common for expats to do here is open up a bar or a restaurant, or maybe even like some sort of craft beer facility. So I know quite a few foreigners here that have like craft beer businesses and do very, very well. I know other ones that have restaurants and perhaps just break even, but it's not too difficult to, no, let me take that back. I think it's very difficult to run a restaurant or business in a foreign country. And in my opinion, if you're coming from the West and you wouldn't start a business in your home country, where laws are arguably much clearer, are more transparent, why would you start one in Vietnam? Yes, it might be cheaper to do it here, but you may have less rights, and if shit hits the fan, then, you know, what are you going to do here? So what other kind of things do expats do for work when they live in Vietnam? Well, remote working for a company outside of Vietnam. So this one's a bit tricky because with the post-COVID visa changes, you can only get 30-day visa at the moment. You can't get the 3-month or 6-month or 12-month visas that you could before. So the vast majority of people who are here working remotely have now left, and the ones that remain are doing 1-month visa runs or are working remotely for a Vietnamese company, and that company is then sponsoring them for their work permit and TRC in Vietnam so they can remain in the country. I know a lot of people like the idea of coming to Vietnam to work remotely. Would I recommend it? I wouldn't at the moment, for sure. It's not much fun doing 30-day visa runs and having that level of uncertainty hanging over your head all the time. It's also kind of expensive, right? You've got to fly out every 30 days, fly back, pay for a visa for another country. Nah, it's not a good idea. I think you'd be better off going to somewhere like Thailand, where there's more potential for longer visas, and maybe even Cambodia, where I think you can get a 1-year visa a lot easier than you can here. Will that change in the future in Vietnam? I think probably, but like many things in Vietnam, it's quite secretive. You don't really know what the government's going to do, so let's see what happens. So Vietnam is fairly similar to places like Thailand and other countries in the region, where they will give preference to local workers. So for example, if you were to start a business here, I believe you have to employ a certain amount of local people before you can employ another foreigner, or before you're able to get your business license. So they're quite nationalistic in that way, and, you know, trying to protect their own workforce first. Obviously a lot of foreigners are brought in for expert skills, especially for construction, I know people, architects from the Philippines and from Japan, who are working on these kind of projects. And yeah, they'll bring them in for 6 months, 12 months, pay them very well, and then send them on their way. Can you stay in Vietnam long term? Well, you can if you get married. Failing that, well, let me just backtrack. So if you get married, you should be able to get a 3-year or 5-year visa exemption through your spouse. So that's one way to do it. If you are not ready to get married, but you still want to stay in Vietnam, then it's real tricky at the moment. And you're probably going to struggle. In fact, I don't think there are any options unless you are of Vietnamese descent or you have relatives here, and you could get a visa exemption. But if you are from somewhere like US, UK, you're going to struggle, and you're probably going to be limited to the 30-day tourist visa at this present time. And you can see it here, there's much less foreigners at the moment. There are quite a lot of tourists around now, but foreigner-wise, there's a lot less. And what I've noticed is a few more Russians recently, for obvious reasons, and a lot more Indians, so a lot more Indian tourists. And you can see that Vietnam is kind of tilted towards the Indian market. There's a lot of flights now from Delhi, Mumbai, coming into Da Nang, Ho Chi Minh City every day. So Vietnam has realized that the China market is closed for the foreseeable, and they've tilted towards the Indian market, and it seems to be working. I see a lot of Indian tourists around, and I've noticed even in my building where I live in a condo, I've noticed a few more Russians, and I do believe that Vietnam gives Russians 3-month visas at the moment, and Ukrainians though, although I'll have to double check that, but that's what I've heard. Okay, so just a bit of insight into what people do here, folks, what I've seen, what my friends do, what I do, etc. So you can get an idea of what you can do if you want to work in Vietnam. Have a great day. Catch you later, folks.